Welcome back. Thank you for coming back. I'm Dr. Shane JC, and we're talking about visual design, visionary sight, employing the optical senses. We're dealing with sight, what we see, but a little bit further, how we process and perceive what we're looking at or what we're encountering. So we were talking about overall, light is perceived as aspects of reality. This is a natural three-dimensional framework. We call it the matrix of reality. All of us are alive. We have breath inside our lungs. We're not unalive. We're alive. I'm sitting in this chair talking to you. Yes. So overall, the enhancing or optimization of visual acuity results in a more effective and productive design endeavor. Note, this is a most important endeavor to invest as much resources into enhancing one's visual aptitudes. We're dealing with sight. Sight. We have physical sight and we have mental sight. Many of us call it the mind's eye. We're talking about body language. A majority, did you know, a majority of communication happens without even sight? That even though a person cannot see, they can still play a piano as a maestro. And we have several examples that you know of people who are limited in their visual senses, but they're masters when it comes to sound. They don't have to see the keys, but they know the right note. They play in according to a rhythm. So we're talking about sight with the natural faculties. We have the visual gateway. We also have the sense of observation, identifying patterns, what's being said, what's not being said. We kind of fill in the blanks. And out of that comes a collective message. As designers, we're putting together what we believe to be critical pieces that will address the pain points of our users. And in the end, we'll create as the final outcome an effective design. So now we're talking about employing the five senses once again. We're talking about hearing, feeling or touch, taste, smell, fragrance, aromas, and sight, of course. So now we're talking about, as we narrow it down, being more acute in our focus of this conversation. We talk about sight with the mind's eye, the innate intuitive aptitudes, the gateway that allows us to see, to perceive, to even understand what needs to be understood. So we talk about intuition, reading between the lines, identification of important patterns, body language, a person slouching or a person could be sitting tall. It tells you a little bit about their self-image, how they feel about themselves. We're also talking about appropriating the necessity of rhythm in timing, because one thing I've learned as a gifted designer, we can have critical design points, but we must be in sync with the pain points, the heart, the pulse of our consumer, our user, and get into a timing. That's the difference between sympathy and empathy. When we talk about sympathy, we're talking about often feeling sorry. We talk about Even as many of you can hear the splendid, very soothing and surrealistic music playing in the background inside my private space. I'm playing what they call cool, sublime jazz. There's a certain rhythm. We're talking about rhythm and timing, where all of the instruments, even though we have more than just a saxophone, we have a keyboard, a guitar, a piano, a drum, we hear the drum, the snares, they all perform in step. So we're talking about sight with the mind's eye, specifically the necessity of rhythm in timing. So now we ask the question, the most important question of all. Perhaps you've considered it at some point here or then, at one point or another. What is mental acuity? For those who may not be aware, who've never heard of such, what do you mean? What are you talking about, Dr. Shane? What is this mental acuity? Speak English. Okay, I'm glad you asked. In the design context, we're talking about entering into a situation with an open mind and a settled determination to see all aspects clearly. And I'm going to pause here because I need to go back and revisit what I was saying before the slight shift. Talking about sympathy. We're talking about sympathy and empathy so that we could get into the rhythm and timing of our users. Sympathy is where you feel kind of sorry. I'm sorry you're going through that awful, bad, and horrific experience. Empathy, on the other hand, has to deal with actually removing yourself from your situation and being able to place yourself into the shoes of those you're designing for. You're trying to give a healing balm, a solution to their main pain points. So that's what the difference between sympathy, to feel sorry. Empathy is a few steps further where you can actually see things from the mind's eye, employing the five senses of someone else. So we're talking about seeing all aspects, getting back to the conversation clearly, focused, concentrated, and all attentive, mentally speaking. Everything, all of our senses are working together, coming towards a point of synchronization of the heart, the mind, and the soul. Essentially, we're approaching any and all projects with a laser beam focused approach that's clear, and there is no room for uncertainty. We see from my perspective, also to be willing to see from the user's perspective or vantage point. Note, to understand from the standpoint of empathy again, as opposed to merely asking critical questions. And like right now, I'm kind of sensing that many of you have really encountered situations in your overall process of maturing as a designer. It is because of my empathy that I'm taking and slow down a little bit to get in step with you, that I'm more concerned about you comprehending the information being shared as opposed to me delivering the message. That's empathy. And as a designer, it's important to employ that soft skill between yourself, the situation, the key identifiable, useful points, discussion points, points of experience that you employ, where you sit back and you reflect and think about, I've seen this before, I've experienced this before. Okay, yeah, somebody I know, one of my friends or colleagues, co-workers, was telling me about a similar situation. All of that becomes a repertoire, a reservoir of invaluable experience to add towards your situation, and it's because of your empathy, you're willing to take your time and focus on what needs to be said, but most importantly, what needs to be heard and what needs to be integrated into your design. So empathy, once again, is to remove oneself from one's perspective and to revisit the situation from the user's perspective. Does that make sense? From the perspective of the one who employed you as a reliable go-to guy or gal, a go-to practitioner, and revisit the situation. This ensures that all the essential points are thoroughly covered. After all, we want to make sure that every waking second, even nanosecond, second, minute, hour, even if it takes several hours, half a day, 2 days, maybe 3, that we take and make sure, like a skilled practitioner that we are, like a master composer, standing tall and erect and postured before his orchestra. You want to make sure everything is sync and in step, that the snares come in and play at the right time. You may have the tuba. You hear it? The little bells in the back. And now we have the brass section, all working together at a specific, we hear the piano, the pianist, working together to create this entire message called a jazz ensemble. That's why it's important to take our time and make sure we know what needs to be said, when it needs to be employed, why it's important to hold it back or to release it, and see the critical details and make sure that each and every critical detail fits into the big picture. I'll see you back in part 3. We're coming at another 12 minutes and 38 seconds. I don't want to take up too much time on each section. So I'll see you back in part 3.